Welcome to my analysis, part 2 of Shari Franke's memoir, House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Shari Franke, daughter of Ruby Franke, of course. Before we dive in, guys, I've got a confession. This is absolutely terrible. See these pieces of paper here? They've literally been sitting on my desk for 6 months, I believe. Yeah. It's been an urgent thing on my to-do list, and I have just kept putting it off. It stresses me out, the very idea of dealing with it. This was a credit alert that my information had been breached. You've heard of them, the national data breaches. This one was from the summer of 2024, explaining how to lock down my credit and all of the steps I would need to take, and all of the companies. I cannot tell you how many times I put it on my to-do list to call or email or to start the process, worrying me to no end, because I know this is a big deal. I know it's super important to protect myself, my name, my financial information, my banking, all of that stuff. And yet it's just overwhelming to even begin. That is where, hello, I'm so grateful that today's video is sponsored by Aura. They approached me, and then I was like, oh yes, please, this is what I need. I was able to try it for free, and you will be able to as well. For one low price, you get to opt out of data broker websites, the ones that sell your information to each other. You get identity theft protection, financial fraud protection. They can lock down your credit and alert you if there's any issues there. Password managers, antivirus, other features as well that I haven't explored yet. Guys, it's already been a game changer. It's such a peace of mind. I was able to set it up. Even that, at first I was like, ooh, is it going to be hard to set up? Because that's going to be one more stressful thing I don't want to deal with. It walked me through, and every little thing, it would even say, this one will take you 2 minutes to do. Want to begin this one now? I'm like, yes, please, I can do 2 minutes. So if you're like me and these kinds of things just cause you anxiety, and then you end up paralyzed for 6 months, you can get a 2-week free trial of Aura through my link, aura.com/AnnetteLionTrueCrime. Aura.com/AnnetteLionTrueCrime. You deserve it, and you're welcome. Now back to the show. And we start getting more into Jody's weirdness. I'm back to Inigo Montoya.
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Or I don't think these words mean what you think they mean. Adulation, Jody defines as when you think you're better than everybody else. I think that's egoism. I think that's pride. That's negative pride. And then denigration is when you think you're less than everybody else or something like that. But that's not what adulation is, guys. I don't know. She's bizarre. When Shari is doing these one-on-one sessions with Jody, there's a point where, she's trying so hard to be good and do the right thing and excel, even in therapy. This is how she was raised, the mentality the poor girl has because of all the crap her moms have put her through since day one. For long, I was documenting and second-guessing every single word that came out of my mouth. Ruby, you say, and Jody, you claim to be Christian, and yet, first 2 great laws, after you love God, love your neighbor as yourself, that implies you love yourself, that you do matter. I would also point out that the Young Women program in the church for decades had these 7 values, and then they added an 8th. But for the most part, it was the 7 values that the young women would make goals to try to build up these values within themselves. And they've kind of revamped the program in recent years. The first 3 are faith, divine nature, meaning we have godliness within us, and then the third, individual worth. So you're not supposed to put yourself down. You're not supposed to put yourself above other people either. You are supposed to recognize that you have, and that breaks my heart that she wasn't allowed to do that. Next time you identify your adulation, Shari, I invite you to explore its opposite. Think of it as a balancing exercise. So then Shari says, so I should self-denigrate instead? Very good, Shari. She's supposed to be telling herself negative things. Therapists are going to help us to reverse that. We're not supposed to be doing negative self-talk. What the heck, Jody? Think to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail this test because I'm a very stupid little girl. Holy abuse, Batman. At one point, Shari says, well, this sucks. And then Jody says, good. Good. Once again, it feels like Jody is like, I have had a miserable life. When I was a child, I was miserable, so everybody should be miserable. With LDS theology, we believe that Satan wants everyone to be miserable like he is. So, hi, Jody. Who do you resemble? Vulnerability is something she can't really do, but Jody insists on. Vulnerability is what Shari Franke experiences when she realizes that she's not right about everything. And that, my dear, is what we call living in truth.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Vulnerability is important. Brene Brown has just, she's, world famous for her research into vulnerability. Go read Brene Brown. Don't listen to Jody. Shari is trying, and she's working with Jody, and she's trying to live up to all these things so that her mom would finally approve of her. Which, of course, would never, ever happen. In the process, though, as she's learning these truths from Jody, with a huge air quotes on that, she starts trying so hard to live by this stuff that she then is imparting this wisdom, truth stuff from Jody, supposedly, onto her friends. And then Jody and Ruby are just cheerleaders in that. But that drives her friends away because that's judgmental. It's rude. It's prideful. It's denigrating somebody else. We don't do that. Hi, that's not Christ-like. Guys, get a clue. Then I realized that losing all my friends was just part of the process. It was a test to see how strong and dedicated I was to the truth. Unlike me, they're all going to hell. We don't believe in hell. Hell we believe in is in the next life, prior to the resurrection, when you're suffering for any sins you haven't repented of. It doesn't last forever. It's no. And then this is where we start getting into, again, twisting of the theology. As a fellow member of the LDS Church sworn to a vow of chastity before marriage, she was treading on thin ice, meaning one of Shari's friends who had kissed a boy. She is so damned, I thought. We do have beliefs in the law of chastity. You don't make that specific vow until you're an adult. When you go through the temple for your endowment, that's one of the covenants you make. It's literally not something a kid would have made yet. Like a high schooler. Aside from that, chastity has a very pretty clear definition, and it doesn't mean you can't kiss boys. She'd actually kissed a couple of different boys. We wouldn't believe that that girl's going to hell, even if we believed in hell, because that's not breaking the law of chastity. But how she herself was getting a little bit, uppity and holier than thou. Say these things to the class that felt a bit arrogant, I think. She's very proud of herself. What happened to the whole adulation concept of putting yourself above others? Isn't that what you're doing? Shari can look back on that time, though, with humor and even laugh at herself. Behold mortals, for Shari has spoken. In hindsight, she's like, yeah, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. She was kind of under the spell of Jody and trying to make her mother approve of her. The idea of unexamined assumptions can lead to distorted thinking. And I would say, again, there's a bit of truth in that. It's worth stepping back and analyzing things, including yourself and your way of thinking. And am I looking at this accurately? Am I interpreting things in a way that might not be real? But then Jody takes that kernel of potential truth and just spirals it into something completely different. This is a high school, private high school, with all LDS kids. So anything that she's thinking is like, oh, this is inappropriate for kids to be reading is ridiculous. The curriculum is handpicked by very conservative parents already. She goes to her mom and she's so thrilled with herself that she was being judgy toward her friend. And Ruby says, wow, that was so truthful and loving of you to reflect that to your promiscuous friend. Loving? That was loving? No. That's not what that word means. But then Shari admits, she goes, I wasn't brave or clever. I was just riding high on my wave of self-righteous connections zeal. And I love that Shari, as young as she is, can look back now and go, I can see all of this clearly. What a mess and a train wreck that was. And I didn't care if I lost every friend I had, if it meant hearing praise fall from my mother's lips. Literally since infancy, all she's wanted is to have her mother accept her and love her and praise her on some small level. On a slightly different note, we learned in here some new information, like how not only was Ruby big into like food storage and prepper type stuff, but specifically a new weird detail. I didn't know she had freeze dryers. She had 2 large freeze dryers, not just dehydrators, freeze dryers. So she would like freeze leftovers and all kinds of stuff, fruits and vegetables, all kinds of weird things. Their new house, it was all very neutral, lots of white walls. They weren't allowed to decorate their rooms, the kids, hang things on the walls. walls. Shari says it was built for show, not for living. They weren't allowed to put anything on the walls because that might damage the paint. The sticky tack stuff and then the command strips, that's what those are for. You can hang up all kinds of stuff and not damage the walls. Completely fascinating is the disconnect of how Ruby told herself, or at least told the public, how the 8 Passengers channel came down. She always said in that teary video that most of us have seen that she was making a lot of money, but it was hurting her children, and she stopped doing it because she had to help her children, which is a complete load of crap. I assumed when I first saw that Connections was taking up so much time that it was a different focus for her. She was just caught up in the Jodi world, and that's what kind of made 8 Passengers sort of fall away. Oh, no. It was the video of Chad admitting on camera that for 6 months he hadn't slept anywhere except on a beanbag. Their editor let that through because there's so many other weird things that Ruby had done that didn't think anything of it. Shari doubts Ruby even really noticed the comment. That video right there is what made people could go, wait, what? And then that's when people started looking back in the old videos and finding the one of the youngest child who didn't have her lunch, threatening to decapitate a stuffed animal. This is a very young child. All they see is mom is threatening to destroy my best friend, my little buddy stuffed animal, who comforts me. Mom certainly doesn't offer love or comfort. And Shari says it wasn't just a punishment, it was emotional terrorism. Absolute cruelty at that point. The audience starts finding all of these old clips that were filmed years before, and that made the channel lose its revenue, lose subscribers. Shari said they lost 90% of their income overnight. Sure, Ruby, go ahead and tell yourself that you stepped away from the channel for the sake of your children. In reality, it was the public backlash. Oh, it's bonkers. Ruby had said, people have been asking for years how I've raised such well-behaved children. Now they know. If they can't handle the truth, that's on them. It doesn't mean they're well-adjusted. It doesn't mean they're prepared to be adults. It doesn't mean they're happy. It doesn't mean that they will be good citizens of society. It doesn't mean they feel loved or cared for. A well-behaved child could be one that's just quiet and sits in the corner and doesn't speak. That is not a success as a parent, in my opinion. I am mother. I know best. It goes back to echoes in my mind of Aunt Bonnie. For all we know, it is not toxic like Ruby has not done it. Any of the kinds of things Ruby's been accused and convicted of. At the same time, she still is family vlogging, and she justifies it because as her children's mother, she knows best, which not necessarily. Another element of Jodi's, the little concept that is, again, so close and yet so far. If you truly want to grow, you must be willing to look at the ugly parts of your psyche. Yes, but you don't look at yourself and say, I'm a horrible human being. Let's sit with this misery. Let's wallow in it and make it worse. That's not helpful to anyone. Shari actually, poor girl, asked for clarity. She's like, what exactly kind of ugliness am I supposed to be seeing? Because she's not seeing it in herself. Which, at that point, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Shari, you're not seeing ugliness? With all this ugliness being thrust upon you? Good job. Talk about resilience. Of course, Jodi, and her wisdom, answers the question. Shari was just not understanding compassion and empathy. And Shari was like, I don't want to be a cold and unfeeling person. And that's how she described me. That's Jodi describing herself. She's accusing Shari of being exactly what she is. That's projection. You may as well have been saying, I, Jodi, I'm cold. I, Jodi, have no empathy. Shari has been keeping a journal. And some people have said, oh, it's something that, Latter-day Saints are like obsessed with the journal keeping. It's like a meme. It's like, well, it's not that strong. When Spencer W. Kimball was president in the 70s and part of the 80s, he encouraged people to keep a journal. Haven't seen a real push since then in the same way. Record keeping is considered important. One of my favorite messages about keeping a journal actually came from Richard G. Scott, who was an apostle. But for him, it was a way to record meaningful experiences, spiritual experiences, promptings and impressions from God, and so you could remember them. So I can find the link to the talking so you can read it or watch it. Questions like prayer and his method, I thought it's just awesome. It's a fantastic talk. The idea that every Latter-day Saint is writing in their journal every single day is not the case at all. But Shari did write a lot, which is another reason I think she actually did write much of this book herself. She is telling Jodi the next week how those words affected her. She says, Jodi, I just wanted to tell you how much it hurt me when you said I was an obedient little drone. But you were right, and I'm very grateful for your honesty. Hearing truth is the only way we can bring about change. And get this, Jodi's response, I never said those things. Gaslighting much? Like what? Shari's like, yeah, you did though. No, I didn't say, I never said those words. So Shari went back to her journal. Did I imagine this? Am I remembering wrong? And she looked at her own words that she had written down the day of. I recorded what she said, and I'm remembering it right. I did remember it correctly. She became even more hyper-focused on finding evidence of her own distortion than on monitoring Jody. She just started noticing situations that didn't make a lot of sense. Jody herself wasn't following her own rules, and that the rules and the methods didn't apply to her. Jody says that a family friend visited and had some of her kids with her, and then after they left, she couldn't find the remote for the television. Those kids they took the remote, or they hid it, I don't know, but the kids they took it. They're spiteful little brats. And Shari was like, well, isn't that an assumption? She's using Jody's own techniques against her, trying to help her see truth. And Jody was just livid. These are just vindictive troublemakers, she called these children. Shall we quote to her what Christ said about people who offend children? They should be drowned with a millstone around their necks. Okay. Jody then found the remote 2 days later. So those kids didn't take it. This is when Shari starts to wake up and go, oh my goodness, Jody is wrong. This is not okay. Final straw for me was when Jody started talking about how babies are distorted. One of our basic core tenets is that children cannot sin. Sin is a choice. You know what God's will would be, and you deliberately could choose something else. A baby is incapable of that. And that's why we don't have baptism until the age of 8, which is the age of accountability, which we believe is when children can start understanding right from wrong and making those choices on their own. So, no. Jody says, you think a baby doesn't know how to manipulate, how to get what it wants? Getting what you need, like, I don't know, food, when you are incapable of getting it for yourself, is not manipulation, especially when you're a child, when you're a baby. Did she expect a 4-month-old to go, like, I don't know, make her own sandwich? She then was teaching. It's our job as women and mothers. I'm like already on high alert when I read that, because women are either like praised for being angels or we're like blamed for every societal ill, like there's no in between. It's our job as women and mothers to break the cycle of manipulation, to teach children from an early age that they need to earn their blessings. Only then can we hope to create a society free from distortion. Again, there's a kernel. She got it from somewhere. There's a little kernel of something. A verse of scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants talks about how essentially it's like a Newtonian law, almost like the cause and effect. Like if you obey a certain law, that certain blessings will come from that. It's just like cause and effect. Like if you do this, then X, then Y. But that doesn't mean that in order to have any kind of blessings, you have to earn them. To be loved by God, you have to earn your way. That is not remotely. So many people think this is what we believe. And I will say, obviously, there are some who do. Yeah, there are extremes in any belief system. Here is what I think is a big key to the Lori and Chad situation. He had his followers, many of these groups. This next little part, I think this is key. Our dedication to thinking critically and analyzing complex ideas was the very thing Jody used against us. She twisted our inquiring minds into knots, using our own logic and reason to lead us down a path of self-doubt and self-deception. But it was all a lie, a carefully crafted illusion to keep us trapped and compliant. And that sounds eerily like something else that I won't bring up, because then people will say that I shouldn't be political, so I won't. But you know, Connections is growing. Some of these people that she has trained want to start coaching other people, and Jody, of course, being the selfish person that she is, wants to benefit financially as much as possible. She has this contract drawn up, meaning that anyone who has ever been trained by her has to sign it, and that they can't use her quote teachings or materials as independent life coaches. Independent, mind you, so they're not even her employees anymore, unless they pay her a cut of their earnings. This sounds like a pyramid scheme. So just one more little check in that ledger of nope. But a lot of people really pushed back and protested against that, so she had to back off. So now I have to wonder what else could have happened if enough people had spoken up and pushed back. But they're not allowed to talk to Paige anymore, this friend. Paige was the wife in the family where Jody lived before she moved in with the Frankes. Paige has a few videos where she talks about how she got pulled into Connections and how she pulled out of it, and she compares Jody and Connections to a cult, and how Jody had almost become their god. I'll see if I can link to some of that as well. After Jody moves into the house, Shari is starting to realize something's going on between her and my parents that we don't know about, and the whole thing is super secretive. She's getting ready to go to college. Jody's now sleeping in her bedroom. The whole thing is weird. Her parents were embracing a level of mysticism I've never seen before. They would conduct what they called spiritual interventions for Jody, hushed, intense sessions meant to heal her. According to Jody's own philosophies, living in truth was supposed to heal you of anything. Feels like she's being attacked by Satan himself, not just demons, but actual Satan, because she's that important. He can't just send his minions, it has to be Satan himself. Ruby starts bunking with Jody. Kevin is now in the basement. Shari brings it back to, well, when I was a kid and I couldn't sleep through the night, I wasn't allowed to have comfort, but now she's comforting this friend that's adult who is scared at night. We talk about the pen papers, the notes from their weird sessions of whatever. Jody believed that these scribblings would one day be scripture, personally validated by God himself. You keep thinking that. Have more with Kevin, and he seemed like a shell of his former self. Wasn't doing anything to stop it either. I wanted to intervene to shake him out of this compliance. I might have a little note here going, Kevin! He has never stood up for anything. Shaking him out of his compliance. He's always been compliant. He didn't even propose. 2 weeks after meeting Ruby, they're engaged, and he didn't know how that happened. It just happened. Ruby and Jody had this just horrific dietary habits. They go to Dairy Queen all the time. She was a cardiologist's nightmare. So I'm wondering, how did Ruby stay so thin? And then they would also go to Mexico and come back with grocery bags full of pills. And that lines up with Chad and Lori and Zulema and Alex Cox and all of them. They're not supposed to do that. She even brings in Visions of Glory. I'm still making my way through it. Here's the copy. Again, one more time, Katie, thank you for sending it to me. So I didn't have to give money, any kind of royalties to them, because gag. There are so many things in that book that are messed up. Let's put it that way. Tom Harrison, who's the guy, he has a pseudonym, but he's the one who's come forward and admitted it's based on his experiences, his dreams, and he regrets having told anyone and allowing it to be published, because that led us to Chad Daybell, it led us to Ruby Franke, and many others. So Jody tried to get 8 passengers, the whole brand, to be signed over to her. It was only the family's manager that was stepped in and was like, no. As Jody is staying at the house, Ruby is like, oh, we can't tell anybody that she's here. But I've got to keep it under wraps. Shari says, as if we're harboring a fugitive. Because here we were, Ruby and Jody preaching truth in their connections videos while concealing the juiciest plot twist of all. What happened to truth? What happened to being completely true and vulnerable and just open? Absolute hypocrites. And her own bedroom was now shrine to truth and Dairy Queen. Again, her humor, I love it. This was a time when she went home. She went home to get something and finds her bedroom just taken over and looking weird. And this is how she describes it. This is one of her first clues that there's really something bizarre happening between Jody and her mother. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candles. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and vanilla wafting from the massage oils on the dresser. I quickly grabbed what I needed and got the hell out of there, feeling like I had just walked into someone's honeymoon suite. The only thing missing was rose petals on the bed. A bit later, late one night, Shari is sleeping on a couch, home from college for a bit, and she happens to catch her mother, Ruby, tiptoeing out of my room, her hair messy, her cheeks flushed, and her robe hastily tied, heading back to the bedroom she shared with my dad. A strange smile on her face. She looked... mischievous. And that's the first inkling that Shari had, that there was something physical going on between her mother and Jody. They're preaching the idea that even looking at someone and noticing that they're attractive is akin to a pornography addiction, that it is sinful just to see someone and be aware that they're attractive. We're realizing that just having Shari notice a boy was cute was somehow sinful to Jody. And now she's having an affair with a married woman. The levels of the cognitive dissonance that woman has to leap over to make any of this make sense is just mind-blowing. How completely hypocritical of them to then be having their own extramarital same-sex relationship when they're preaching so heavily against anything remotely touching the sexual arena as being sinful. Absolute hypocrites. Shari says they're 2 women who preach truth while living lies. Yep. Who condemned queerness very publicly in their connections videos while embodying it privately in my room. On my bed, most likely. The hypocrisy is astounding. Shari says that she had several gay friends. She asked, do you know Jody at all? Jody Hildebrand? What are your impressions of her? And they said, oh gosh, that woman is so closeted. And she's like, okay, yeah, that tracks. That was a bit validating because that's kind of what she felt too. Shari starts thinking back to the New Testament and how Christ actually treats people. Looking at the Samaritan woman who was living with a man and not married, she was considered an outcast, a sinner, shunned by her society. But Jesus looked at her, his eyes full of compassion, of understanding. He spoke to her, not with condemnation, but with love. And so she keeps thinking, repeats what Jesus told her. You should worship in spirit and in truth. And so she's thinking in spirit and in truth, in spirit and in truth, which is not the truth that Jody was teaching. Jody was using the word truth like a weapon. Their words might honor God, but do their actions align with the Bible? And that was the interesting thing, because that actually echoes some of the words of Joseph Smith. What church should I join? And part of his answer was that many of these ministers say, basically they're saying things that sound lovely, but their hearts are far from him, meaning God, which sounds like it's kind of an echo with Jody there. And then we get into some stuff that just was heartbreaking on a whole new level. Shari starts doing some work for a man. She calls him Derek. I suspect that is a pseudonym. I suspect that's not really his name. It starts out with just flirting, and then he convinces her, because she's like all having a panic attack or something, and he goes, oh, I think that skin-to-skin contact will help you calm down. Can I take off your shirt? And I was like, what plot twist? Like, I didn't know that any of this was part of it. She fought. It was useless. He's bigger than me. This whole thing with this man goes on for about 2 years, where he is like 50 years old. She's barely into college. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the control he has over her. He basically becomes a stalker, threatens her with all kinds of things, and at the same time is like messing with her head. Well, if you can't handle X, Y, and Z, then your husband will not be happy. She's just so frozen and fawning, and those trauma responses. I just want... I would love to know who this man is and then just deck him. He absolutely found someone who was already isolated and vulnerable and absolutely took advantage of her in that way, and that is so disgusting. But she didn't dare tell anyone, and also who could she tell? She basically driven away her friends. Her mother had cut her off. Jody had cut her off. Her dad wasn't responding to her, and she was alone. This man, Derek, was the only person who even noticed her existence. Because in a world where I often felt invisible, wasn't that worth something? I can't even imagine the pain and the confusion she is going through. And she was, 19 at this point? 18, 19? And this is when also Kevin then is invited to leave and to work on himself for at least a year. Now, I know he was invited to leave. I didn't know that everybody knew going in it would be at least a year. He left and was willing to have no contact, even with his young children. I just cannot grasp it. She's starting to push back on some of these things, and she goes, error, 404, obedient daughter not found. But that was awesome. And when she tells her mother, I'm not coming home for Thanksgiving, her mom says, your siblings will be disappointed. Mom didn't include herself. So they were going to have this girls' night out. Jody wants to feel close to you. Okay, whatever. But then Jody was an hour late. At 7 o'clock comes and goes, which is when Jody was supposed to show up. So I was like, well, we're hungry. So Shari, after an hour, makes herself some food, figuring that she was canceled. Jody shows up an hour late, flies off the handle that they'd already eaten. And she's like, well, Mom, isn't one of the principles of truth being on time? And she goes, mic drop. In part of this argument, then Ruby says, may I remind you, you're only an invited guest here, Shari. This isn't your home. It's mine. It's not even Kevin's home anymore. It's not your parents' home. It's almost Jody's home. And thanks to the fact that Ruby was arrested before she could get papers in front of Kevin, because he admitted he would have signed anything that Ruby put in front of him. The argument continues, and finally Ruby goes, I can't take this abuse. She rushes out the door, and Jody comes after her. Shari's like, do I laugh or cry? This is absurd. And she's like, yeah, my mother playing the victim card while holding all the cards, as she always had. And at that point, I wanted just to stand up and give poor Shari a standing ovation. The younger children are actually deprived of Christmas. It's supposed to be a beautiful gift to them, for them to learn not to be selfish, and to watch their older siblings open gifts. In fact, Ruby says, everyone open up your presents, and in doing so, give the young ones the gift of this precious, beautiful lesson that will serve them for years to come. because young children that's the message they'll get. Don't be selfish. It's a beautiful lesson. And apparently Jody actually said, you can't just expect love and presence. Many have nothing at all. You can't expect love from your own parent. Just because you didn't get love or the presence you wanted doesn't mean other children should be deprived. You schmuck. There's moments where Shari starts blaming herself. That she goes, I was supposed to be their guardian angel, their rock. Instead, I was a silent bystander, no better than my mute, nodding father. Number one, Shari, what could you have done? You're barely an adult at this point. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't have saved them. It's not your job to save them. A, and B, you couldn't have. Kevin should have. But that job should never have been on your shoulders. Period. That job does not belong on a child's shoulders, even a newly minted adult child. So after that Christmas, Shari is worried that things are just going to get worse for her younger siblings. Things get worse with this Derek guy. And this part broke my heart, because I think one of the reasons she was susceptible and vulnerable to Derek, Mr. Predator, mind you, was because her dad wasn't there for her. And she needed his attention. She needed her father's support. And she didn't get it. I was so hungry for any scrap of fatherly attention, any hint that someone truly gave a damn about me. That's what led her to be so vulnerable to Derek. Eventually, she stands up to him. As scary as it was, she had 2 roommates at that point, and the blinds were shut, the doors were always locked. He would circle the area and watch their apartment. Scary stuff. And he'd call and text constantly and email, and then she'd block him and he'd open up a new email address. That was only when she was like, I can't do this anymore, no more, I gotta cut him off. And then Derek got to be very, very dangerous. I blame Kevin for so much of this. Or I was like, well, he should have done better. But it wasn't just since Jody showed up. It was since Ruby entered his life. He was an invertebrate. Grow a spine. I don't think he belongs in prison as long as Ruby does. I think she is such a narcissist that she's dangerous to society. I wouldn't be opposed to him getting some prison time. He's complicit, in my opinion. And going back to the definition of the law of chastity, Derek says that in God's eyes, we're not doing anything wrong, and that's all that matters. Yeah. The things that he's doing to Shari, he's married. Yeah, that is against God's laws of chastity, but as we define them. So you schmuck. Here's another time, where the LDS versus co-writer, ghostwriter, who's not LDS, comes in, because this phrasing doesn't make sense. Because Shari, I'm an elder in the Melchizedek priesthood. I'm responsible for the spiritual and temporal well-being of the men in my quorum. Do you really think I would do anything to jeopardize my calling? Any grown man, adult man, this is like from 18 years old, if you're an active practicing Latter-day Saint male, you will be ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood. The lowest you can be is an elder. That's the expectation, is that any man you see who's an active practicing Latter-day Saint is going to be an elder. So that's a bizarre thing for him to say. Of course you are. But then he says that he's in charge of the spiritual and temporal well-being of the men in his quorum. He's Elders Quorum president is what it sounds like, but they don't say that. So the terminology just makes no sense here. She says that she was too addicted to the scraps of validation he gave me. The morsels of support had tossed my way when it came to my family. He was the only one who knew how messed up it all was. The only one telling me I wasn't crazy, wasn't making it up in my head. Predators prey on the vulnerable. She's finally like, I'm going to try to stand up to my mom. And she's, Mom, I don't feel like you care for me. I feel like you're always just talking to Jody. I feel ignored. And that was in a text. I had just signed my own death warrant, the way she felt like. After she sent that text, Kevin and Ruby invite her out to dinner to talk about things. Of course, Ruby's like, what was your motive in sending me that text? And then she's like, honestly, I was hoping you might actually hear me for once. And of course, Ruby responds very Jody-like. Thank you for allowing me to reflect truth to you. Now that you're an adult, you get to pay for dinner. And she barely had enough in her bank account to cover this dinner. She didn't know that she'd be paying for 3 people. Derek would learn about these things and then twist them and give himself more credibility. I see how messed up your parents are. I see how wrong this is. Let me help you. He's the only person she can really talk to. Only person she dares tell about all this messed up stuff. And therefore, he has all the ammunition he needs. He knows exactly which buttons to push, what words to say, how to take advantage of her. She goes to talk to her bishop. This is one of the times I'm like, yes, Bishop, you got this one right. She unloads something. She doesn't really explain how much she told him. He just says, I think maybe therapy would be a good thing. And I can't really do that. I did that once. My mom won't let me go back again. Ruby would find out with insurance claims coming through. She wouldn't let it happen. And he says the church can take care of that. We'll cover whatever you need. No questions. And true to his word, the church stepped up and covered the cost of my therapy and medication. Well, thank you. I mean, not the church is perfect, but church can do good things. Not every bishop is awesome, but this one sounds like he really was. Sherry kind of summarizes Jody's beliefs in saying that there is one path to justice: crush the sperm donors and liberate the females. For Kevin, I could have empathy on this one, and any other man she ever counseled, as well as their children. Her accusations took an even darker turn when Jody twisted the happiness he, meaning Kevin, felt in hugging his daughters into something sinister and perverse. She filled his mind with doubts and self-loathing, making him second-guess every interaction and every display of affection. I can only imagine the horror and disgust that filled his mind, the shame, the fear, the sickening idea that he might not be a safe person for his own children to be around. How toxic. Hugging your own daughter? Sherry needed to have a father give her a hug periodically. And the fact that she didn't have that is what led her into being vulnerable for a psycho predator like Derek. So to have Jody say, you can't even hug your daughters because that makes you a danger to them. Wrong person is the predator. She gets involved with the Haymans. She's not clear on this, but I think these are neighbors, but also maybe her old high school teacher and his wife. They had taken at least part of one of Josie's courses. They thought it was dumb and they dropped out. They had had just enough interaction with it to understand how messed up some of it was, at least on some level. And so they became a huge support for Sherry. They let her stay at their place at times. They absolutely treated her like a child of their own. She actually asked them, can I call you mom and dad? And they were so honored and hugged her and supported her. Sherry realizes, I need to get my money into a separate bank account where my mom can't touch it, which was so wise because Ruby did take all of her siblings' money. Then the family, when they completely cut off Sherry, she realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my car. And if you're in this area of Utah, you need a vehicle to get around at all. And her mom had the title of the house. She asked Mrs. Heyman to come with her to get the title back. Bless Mrs. Heyman. She actually stood up to Ruby and said, give her the papers. We need to go. And in the acknowledgments at the end, she thanks Kevin. And she also thanks mom and dad. She finally did some little sleuthing and found where Chad was staying. Got some of his favorite snacks to his door and was planning on just leaving a note and the snacks there. The door swings open and he's standing in the kitchen in plain view. He actually, at this point, he's still kind of brainwashed. And he's like, yeah, you're not supposed to talk to me. Sherry also was very aware that despite what Kevin believed, Ruby would never welcome him back. That was the end of the marriage. Ruby would never let him back in. Jody would never let him back in. Her family was just going to be gone forever, which is, again, counter to this whole concept that family is so important. There is so much more to talk about, but we will stop here for today. So a huge thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this video. Be sure to use my link to get a 2-week free trial of your own. I've tried it. The services are amazing. It's easy and it's fast. Trust me, you will want to take advantage of that 2-week trial. Be sure to use my link, aura.com/NetLionTrueCrime, Lion as an Lyon. Let me know what you think about everything we've talked about in this video. Have you read Sherry's book? Do you plan to? Do you agree or disagree with me? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section. As always, you'll find links of where to find me elsewhere online in the description, and you'll find my Aura link there too. While you're in the comment section, go ahead, drop off some emojis of chocolate or whatever your personal comfort food might be for all of us to nosh on as we discuss this and other cases that we talk about here. Also, please give the video a like. It makes a big difference in people who like this kind of thing being able to find it. And also, take a moment to subscribe if you're new. Till next time, pass the chocolate.